Our first order of business, next order of business is Pledge of Allegiance. And I've asked Chief Cusick if he would lead us in a Pledge of Allegiance and also share some other words with us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it. Thank you for everybody. Real quickly though, I'm sure we're all aware of what occurred to the down in Ada County this last night, or I'm sorry, the night before with the deputy, Tobin Bolter. I'm hoping we could all maybe have a moment of silence for his passing, but also keep in mind that Deputy Dallas Denny also was injured while responding to that call, and she's still in the hospital. So silence for them and think about their families and their community as well. So. I'd like to start everybody with a pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You know, councilors, I think it was last week we had our city clerk sworn 2 new officers for the city of Lewiston, and it's a pretty serious oath that they take. And so to defend the Constitution and of the United States and Idaho and to service. So we are very grateful that they, in this instance, faithfully discharged their duties, and regretfully, it cost Deputy Sheriff Bolter his life. So anyway, for the family too, thank you. Our next order of business is citizen comments. This is an opportunity for citizens to address the council on agenda items or other items they wish to bring to the attention of the council. Citizens are encouraged to discuss operational issues in advance with the mayor. In consideration of others wishing to speak, please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. Eric, welcome. If you please just give us your name, city of residence, and we'll turn the floor over to you for approximately 3 minutes.
Eric Peterson, Lewiston, Idaho. I'm here on something I've talked about in the past and suggested that we look at what's called a mobile app and for reporting of city tasks that's in what we call a non-real-time environment. In other words, it's your messaging system everyone loves today because they don't have to respond now, they can respond later. The way this system works is we have, well, I'll just call it, I used My Lewiston, which is the app we had, we paid for, we did all the annual things for. And thanks to a memo from the mayor and this committee that was looking at it, they recommended that we use 311 to actually implement this type of service. But they state it's only $300 for a one-time cost. And that actually isn't quite accurate. Because the history of 311 phone calls, you know what 411 is? 311 is kind of addition to that, only you use it for services, tasks, and such like that. And it started in Baltimore in 1960 or something. And what happened is they had this system where they could phone in and leave messages and people had to respond. What happened is it developed into a very large call center. What's a call center? A lot of wages.
Eric, can I cut you off for 1 second, please?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Councilors, can you hear what Eric is saying? Just give me a thumbs up or something. Yes? Okay. All right, super. Thank you. Continue.
So it developed into large call centers. As you may guess, over time, actually open source people who do software, which is why we have a lot of things out there you don't know about, got into this and figured out how to put this into contact relations management software. And suddenly they had this beautiful system. You didn't have to have hardly any employees. And you had an annual cost to maintain a database system that was like a ticketing system, which is what the IT folks use. Say, hey, we got this phone call. Okay, who's assigned to it? What's the task? What's the status? Send this back to the person. And then what's the progress? We're done. And the ticket's cleared. All right? That's the idea in this. And we had My Lewiston, and it worked great. I used it all the time. Okay, here's a sidewalk problem where it's a dangerous sidewalk. here's where bushes are all over the sidewalk. I just take a picture, put in a little note, say sidewalks or ADA issues, sidewalks, ping. It would go out, I'd get a response saying, thank you for that, we're on it. Within about a week, it was resolved. And I got the information, everything else. And so I was in partnership with the city of Lewiston. And imagine having all the people in Lewiston with that same sort of potential. Now, the My Lewiston app, when they changed their operating system here, they didn't carry that over because nobody used it. There was like maybe 3 people. I was the main user. It was never advertised. Nobody knew about it. So that same system would probably cost, according to a memo I got, about $10,000 a year to maybe keep going for licensing, whatever else. But barely the cost of a part-time temp person. And no need to pay for healthcare or pension. Okay, the implementation cost may be about $30,000. Again, a relatively minor one-time cost. Now for that money, what do you get? This real-time system where we're engaged. Now how to get it out to the notice of the people? Oh, the memo, it says, you know, like, we might have to spend $100,000 a year in marketing repeated times to get it out there paying privately. Yeah, well, I called the utility office, Billings, and said, has anyone ever put the advertisements or something in the billings? No, but yeah, is there a way to do it? Yeah, we have a memo sheet. We do that. That would reach about 9,000 residences on a regular basis at no additional cost to the city. That's called marketing, okay? There's also other systems. I don't know if you're still doing My Lewiston because I haven't been around for a while. But you have all sorts of things you're sending out. If you use your existing budgeted announcements, you just tag on something about, hey, My Lewiston app, here, use it. You'd be surprised. Anyway, I'm here to get that maybe this year, what is it? Maybe 40,000 in budgeting, 34 first time, maybe 10 to 20 for an annual. So you have this partnership and we get relief that we know somebody's doing something. Right now, I see every day if I'm out, at least 10 things that I could report, that I don't. Why? Because you have a paper reporting system that you have to get down to them and find it. Good luck. When I did a public records request for all those forms, I got 1. Turns out I dug deeper and they must have missed it. There's about 3 or 4 others that you have to know what you're doing to get to it. So these aren't being reported. Nothing like the one I use in DC is called DC 311. See that connection? It's one of the developments out of Baltimore. Again, we can do that. We have done it, but we're not, what the memo said was, we can't justify spending this type of money to have an direct communication and response or a relationship with all of our city customers. I'm saying, put in $40,000 or $50,000 this year to get that going. And it will pay off. Every system that uses this, every city, and there's a lot of them, it has paid off big time. They don't have these costs associated with other things. Send out a supervisor, find this. So I'm done, but I'll be back.
Yeah, thank you, Garrett. Appreciate it, yeah, and I'll follow up with our IT folks who are gonna change their name to IT and Security. Thank you. I don't see any more members of the public here. We had one, he came in, grabbed the agenda and turned around and walked out, so it didn't appear to appeal to that person, so we'll just keep moving here. About that, move to Roman numeral 4, budget items. Item A, FY25 budget process. We have our finance director, Amy Gordon, here. Amy, if you'd please introduce yourself for the record, and I will turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council, Amy Gordon, City Finance Director. So this afternoon, I am here to kick off our 2025 budget. That not me.
I think they're sharing the screen
Okay.
for the Zoom people.
Here in a minute to do his magic. All right, so we are here this afternoon to kick off our 2025 fiscal year budget. That is the budget that would go into effect this upcoming October 1st. And so this year, we're going to take a little bit of a new approach with council. We had solicited some feedback from members of council after the completion of our last budget cycle on what different council members felt worked well for them, ideas on how we could present information differently that was more user friendly to council in making their decisions and gathering the type of information that they would like to see for making their budget decisions. So this year, we are going to keep the budget work sessions category focused versus department focused. We've done a couple of different mixes of that in the past where we've done, some departments have come up and presented their budgets, and we've had some work sessions that were category focused, like a work session on internal service funds, maybe a work session where you would get a presentation from the police chief or the fire chief. But this year, we're gonna keep our work sessions tailored specifically to categories that really drive the budget, specifically increases and changes to the budget. So outlined here is the list of the work sessions that we have planned out for council. May 13th, we will be back for work session number 2. And in that work session, we're gonna keep it on rates. So all the rates that the city charges for a fee, or I'm sorry, for a service. So that would cover our enterprise funds rates, the rates that water users pay for their water service, rates that you would pay to reserve a shelter at the park. So all the rates of the city that we set by ordinance and resolution. Then on May 20th, we will come back and have a presentation on all the capital projects. So this would be all of our large projects that we fund through our capital projects fund, as well as capital projects that are occurring in fiscal year 25 from the enterprise funds. And then any other large-scale capital projects, so maybe projects that are gonna be proposed to use the assigned building fund, building reserve for, or any other improvements to city infrastructure or buildings. Well, let me back up for a second. So one of the things I wanted to do, though, is in addition to the work sessions, I guess I left 2 of them off. We should probably talk about all the work sessions. In June, we'll come back and we'll do a work session on all the budget requests. So any requests that a department director has made to increase their budget, maybe to ask for one-time funding for a specific project, those will all be presented to you in one work session. So this year, council will get to have information on each and every budget request that has been requested by a department head. And we'll also, in that work session, cover personnel costs. So that's when we'll talk to you about the trending of the CPI, what the city's COLA increases would be, health insurance, and any other information that we would have to present on personnel, city personnel. And then we'll have a work session on June 25th where we'll kind of wrap the budget up. We'll talk about where we sit with property taxes at that point. It'll be a work session that we can address any information that council members specifically want more information on. And then if you recall, in the last several budget seasons, we have done multiple work sessions that last week of June. So if need be, we can always build in additional work sessions if you guys are looking for more information or want to dive a little bit deeper into a subject matter. That would be available to you as well that week. But internally, I thought it would be nice to share with council what we are doing behind the scenes that you guys don't maybe necessarily know. And that is on March 18th is when our departments started working on their budgets. We had a kickoff with them where we went through the budget process. We gave them their budget information from the current year, some instructions on what they could go in on that information and modify, what they needed to do to request additional funds in their budget, the process that they needed to use for that. And so the city department directors have been working on their budgets since March 18th. And then my office, my staff, specifically Claire, has received all that information in as of last Monday. And so then that's the point in time that we start going through that information and updating narratives to the budget, putting in more detail behind the numbers, making certain that we have all their budget requests and that we're putting them in a format that will be easy for the mayor to understand, for council members to understand when we present that information. And then starting tomorrow, the mayor, myself, and Claire, along with each of the individual department heads, we will sit down and have one-on-one meetings with each and every department and go through their budget requests, talk about their budget in detail. That's a time that they might bring up some operational issues that they're having or funding challenges so that we can start to build the complete budget and layer in the request with the funding that we have available, do the math on where we're short in funding, if we are short, work with property tax dollars, user rates, and balance everything out. So I also wanted to review with council what your role looks like in the budget process. I think it's always really important to have that future glance at all the steps that you'll take in finalizing and putting that final seal on the budget. So we'll be having our work sessions with council, and during those work sessions, we are looking for you to engage with us, to give us feedback, to ask questions. We don't ever want a member of council to hesitate to interrupt us and ask questions, because our goal is to make certain that we're giving you as much information, as much data. We're getting to you what you need to make your budgetary decisions. We want to make certain that you understand our revenues, our services, anything that helps you adopt that budget in the end. So that's what we're here for. That's what the work sessions are for. We're looking for that interaction. The more feedback we get from you, the better the information is that we can provide to you for that decision-making process. So any, concerns that you might have with the budget too, we're gonna be presenting this to you where we're kind of getting the feedback on those decisions as we build our budget. So we'll have a discussion here on the next work session that's on all of our rates that the city charges for services. And then shortly thereafter in June, the department directors will be bringing back those rate resolutions. So that's when they're gonna come this year with resolutions that council would approve for rates for the fiscal year 25 year. That way we have those rates approved before we finalize our budget. And if we need to make any adjustments to the budget, we'll have the ability to do so. We'll be having a budget work session on personnel and personnel related costs so that council can be familiar with those in addition to the budget request. So all that information that we're giving you to in the work sessions, we are looking for that feedback. We want to know any concerns you have, because our goal is when we put the budget out to publish, that we have addressed as many of your questions and concerns that we can, so that when we publish it and bring it to you in public hearing, you guys will have all the information that feeds that budget, as will our citizens. And then hopefully when our citizens come to provide public testimony, they'll have the information that drove the budget. So with that, there are some formal actions council takes. You have rate resolutions that you'll approve, or you may choose to amend or modify, but ultimately departments will be bringing forward their rates for fiscal year 25, and they'll look to you for approval on those rates. The appropriations ordinance, so that's the budget ordinance that sets the spending for each and every department. Then you'll have your tax certification ordinance, which is the amount of property taxes that we plan on levying. And there'll be a tax certification ordinance regardless if we're increasing taxes, keeping them the same, or decreasing. It will come each and every year for approval by council. And then foregone tax resolutions. So if we are not taking our full 3%, or if we are taking our full 3%, it still requires a resolution. So whether you want to reserve any taxes into your foregone balance or not, it requires a resolution. And then also as part of our 25 budget process, we present to council the amendments to the current year budget. So we do that in conjunction with our regular budget process to make any amendments to our current year budget. So in this work session, we're just going to provide to council some background information where we will go through the different funds that the city has, what type of funds they are, their funding sources, what they have available to support their budget. And then we won't verbally today in our presentation, I'm not going to talk too much about services those funds and revenue support, but in your packet, you'll have some more information. And I should have touched on this earlier, but this year we are, as you guys can see, providing each council member a budget binder. And so we're gonna build this binder for you as we go along. So each work session, we will bring to you a physical copy of the presentation, and then any supplemental information that supports the information of that presentation. We'll bring it to you that you can insert in that binder. And then as we work through the process, if we come across any other information or we're able to compile more information that we think would be helpful to council members, we'll bring that as well so that you can put it into that binder. You guys have a pocket in the binder that has pins and highlighters and Post-it notes so that you can take notes as we go along. But we thought this might be helpful so that you would have all your information in one place and you wouldn't have to go and try to remember which work session we talked about that item at. You can take your notes to have those for reference. So this year we're going to give this a try and we'll see how you like it, and hopefully if we can continue this on if it's helpful. So here is a look of all the city funds. We have a total of 16 funds. We write a budget for each and every one of these funds. They are budgets that are independent of one another, meaning each fund has their own revenue sources that support the expenses of that fund. Some of those revenue sources are the same for different funds. Some of them are similar to other funds. And so that's kind of what we'll talk about today. The first two funds I wanted to review with you are our fiduciary funds. So these are funds that are that we have professional investments to support them. They're professionally managed investment funds that are held by the city for the benefit of the individuals for whom the city is acting as a fiduciary. So we have two of them: perpetual care, which is established by state code. As operators of a cemetery, every time we sell a plot, we charge a perpetual care fee. That fee goes into this investment fund. And only the earnings, investment earnings and interest off that fee can be utilized. So we charge the fee at the time we sell the plot. The fee goes into this professionally managed investment account, and that fee will forever remain in that investment account. But what we are able to do as a cemetery operator is use the investment income off that fee to help support the cemetery. This is a separate fund of the city. It's not part of the cemetery fund. It's professionally managed by an outside investment advisor. It's managed based on an investment policy, and it's intended for a very long horizon, right? It's there for the perpetual care of a cemetery. We, every year, budget to take a transfer off this account, and then we budget to receive that transfer into the cemetery fund. And then what it does is it provides some revenue to the cemetery to help with their operation cost. And then we also have a police retirement fund, and this is for police officers, I believe. There's a little bit more information about this in your packet. So it's for any police officer that the city had that was hired prior to, I believe, 1979. We currently no longer have any active employees who are covered by this plan. All of the plan members are now retired. These, this fund is considered self-funded, fully funded at this point. Over the years, we had the members contributed to the plan, the city contributed to the plan, their earnings off those investments contributed to the plan, and they now provide a retirement benefit to those officers who have retired. There is also a survivor benefit too, so it could be that the officer has passed and their widow is now receiving the benefit. This fund will stay in existence as long as we have beneficiaries who are receiving a benefit. The fund is professionally managed by an outside investment advisor. He manages the plan based off an investment policy. The projected earnings, target earnings for that plan is, I believe, about 5.75%. And so it's designed where it's generating enough income to support itself. We do a professional actuary study every 2 years. And based off that actuary study is what we determine whether it's fully funded or not. The last study was done based off the plan year that ended September 30th, 2022. And at that time, it was considered to be fully funded. I believe the fully funded balance was 12.9 million. At the end of last fiscal year, we were sitting at 13.1 million. I've included in your packet where we are as of today, which is 13.9 million. So I would expect that going into our next actuary report, it will still be considered fully funded. Actuaries take a look at just not only what you have in the plan and what you're paying out in the plan, but they take a look at mortality tables and a bunch of other factors to determine how much you need to have in that fund. So there is always a possibility that it could be considered where it needed an additional contribution to make it fully funded, and then that would be something that the city might have to consider whether they contribute additional funds to that plan or not. But as of right now, these funds they're self-sufficient. So they operate off what they currently have within them. So when we talk about budget, you're not gonna hear a lot about these two funds because they don't need property tax dollars currently to support the funds. So they work off the investments that they currently have, the earnings off those investments, and at this time, we're not needing to put any city dollars into these funds. So you won't hear much about these funds throughout the budget process, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to highlight them first, because today might be the only time you hear about these funds. Their budget will be written that the expenses of these funds will be provided for the revenues that they are generating for themselves. So these are our governmental funds. Most importantly, these are our funds that are supported by property tax dollars. So when we talk about the expenses of any of these funds, general fund, capital fund, cemetery, transportation, library, public transit, when we're talking about the budgets for these funds, we are potentially talking about property tax dollars. The Economic Development Fund is a governmental fund, but it currently is not supported by property tax dollars. During my time at the city, we have never contributed property tax dollars towards it. The primary activity of the Economic Development Fund has been the CDBG program. We use this fund to receive in grant dollars from the Department of HUD to support the CDBG program. So it's money in, money out. It's not receiving any city dollars outside those grant funds. We have also, when the city initially received the ARPA funds, this is where we brought them in. So we're also spending the ARPA funds from this fund as well. Again, those are federal dollars. There's no city dollars going towards that project. But what the Economic Development Fund does have in it, which I think is important for council to know, is there's approximately $300,000 that is in their reserves from years ago. The city at one point in time did dedicate property tax dollars to this fund so that they would have match dollars available or opportunities to participate in economic development projects within the city. So I think it's really important for city to know that those funds exist. They may not be part of the 25 budget, but they are there and available to council should an opportunity arise that would meet the definition of economic development. If it had a purpose of economic development, we could always utilize the reserves that are in that fund to go towards that project. But other than those reserves that are sitting there, we use this fund to monitor or to manage the CDBG program. And then we're also running our ARPA dollars through this fund as well. So we receive the ARPA funds in from the United States Treasury. We've dedicated those dollars towards the downtown water line replacements. And so we will spend them out on those projects. And once those projects are completed, there will no longer be ARPA dollars in there. And then this fund would only then be used for CDBG or however the council might decide to put those reserves to. So let's just back up a couple more slides. So economic development currently does not get property tax dollars. Council could always choose to put property tax dollars in there if they had a reason for it, but currently it's not getting property tax dollars.
Dr. Gordon, why don't we just make sure the council in virtual land doesn't have a quick question before we get too much information go in their direction. Councilor Spickelmeyer or Klein, do you have any questions for us? I can't see if you have your hands raised or comments.
I didn't have anything, thanks.
I'm good too.
Thank you both.
So not ignoring Economic Development Fund, but if we look past it, the 6 remaining funds are the funds that are currently receiving property tax dollars. And here's how that breaks down. We have our general fund, who is the primary receiver of property tax dollars for the city of Lewiston. Our general fund is kind of like the parent corporation of the city. It houses our general governmental services. So we have services within there who provide services that they also receive fees for, such as EMS, building licenses, building permits, but they're still also supported by the general fund. We have services in there who receive some revenues for their services, but are subsidized pretty significantly by property tax dollars. So our recreation programs, our pools, our city pools. And then within general fund, we also have just our general governmental services. So those departments who provide services citywide. So your budget's there, the mayor's budget's there, our legal office, my budget's there. So we are here to support the entire city. And then our capital fund, which is the brighter red piece of the pie there, they are currently receiving 2.8 million in property tax dollars. 2,781,000 of that is capital transportation. And then 100,000 goes to our city parks. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The transportation fund, they have an operating fund that supports their operations and maintenance. It also supports the divisions that provide support to all the city infrastructure systems, such as our engineers, our GIS team, Public Works Administration, and then the Streets Operations and Management Division is all housed within that transportation fund. Sometimes Dustin will refer to it as a general fund, and it kind of makes me a little uneasy because I don't want you to confuse that with our true general fund, but that is because it's their operating fund. That's where they pay for their salaries, their benefits, their operational cost, but not their capital projects. And then our library receives about 1.5 million of property taxes each year, and that supports the library. That's what the library operates off of. Our public transit system, this year, they're receiving 460,000. That's higher than previous years and higher than normal because they do have some capital projects programmed this year that additional property taxes are going towards. The public transit receives a lot of funding from the Federal Transit Authority to provide for their operations. They are 50% supported in their operations and then 80% supported in their capital side from federal dollars. But we still contribute taxes towards the city's portion of that operation. And then our cemetery receives 150,000 in property taxes. The perpetual care fund, we take a withdrawal of 50,000 a year to help the cemetery operate, but then we also contribute 150,000 of property taxes each year. So here's a breakdown of capital transportation, because one of the things I wanted to demonstrate is that $2.781 million I said they were receiving this year. That is an increase from last year of 1.65 million. If you recall through the budget process last year, council reallocated property tax dollars that had been going towards the building reserve fund and the general fund and put it towards capital transportation. So this kind of demonstrates how their budget has changed over the last few years. They had, in fiscal year 22, they'd received an additional 700,000 in property tax dollars. Those were dollars that were originally going to that police retirement fund that we spoke about earlier. Now that it's fully funded, we don't have to put city dollars towards that fund. So we were able to start dedicating it to the capital fund to help with street capital improvements. And then the additional 1.6 billion from last year is now being dedicated so that we can start building up the reserves that we need to do some of our road rebuilds and road improvements that the city is behind on. And so then I'll just mention here, in addition to this 2.781 million of property taxes that is going into the capital fund, there's also 100,000 that goes in every year that supports the park infrastructure. So it can go towards new shelters or any other improvements to our park system, new playground equipment. Okay, so we have 4 enterprise funds. We have water, wastewater, sanitation, and new in our current budget year is the stormwater. These are the funds that are supported by user rates. So through city resolution, we set the rates for these funds, and those user rates provide the revenue to these funds that support both their operations and their capital improvements. On our utility bills that we receive each month, we pay in a fee for each service we use. When the city collects those fees, when they're collecting their water fees, they're going into the water fund. And then we take those user fees and use it to support both their operating and their capital budget. Internally, we go through a process, we call it depreciation funding. So we take what that system is depreciating each year. So I believe water is around $1.5 million of depreciation every year that we record on the water system. And we fund their capital cash account with that. And then that money is then used to pay for their capital projects. We also, the user rates for the water and the wastewater funds also have a component built in there that pays for their bond improvements. We've completed both of those projects, and that we now make debt service payments on those bonds. So included in the water rate, we are collecting enough to cover our operations, our capital projects, and our debt service payments, similar to wastewater. Our fee is set to where it provides support for our operations side, our capital side, and our debt service payment. On the operations side, the enterprise funds, they have the personnel cost, supplies and materials, annual maintenance that they have done, contracted services. But then they also have to make certain that they're maintaining those systems on a larger scale, so that they're making the necessary improvements on those systems, such as improvements to the plant itself, the underground infrastructure that gets the water away from the water plant, brings the wastewater into the wastewater system, pipe replacements, and then all the vehicles and special equipment that they need to perform those improvements and to maintain their plants. So we're talking larger pieces of equipment like generators, pumps. So when Justin, of course, he'll go more in detail with you during the user rate work session, but when they design those rates, they're putting before council rates that they feel are necessary not only to provide the operational support that they need, but to also invest back into those systems to keep them at a level that's not considered deteriorating like it has been in the past. So that's the idea behind the rates and the rate study. When FCS looks into what are appropriate rates for those systems, they're looking long-term as to what we need to keep our rates, or our systems at a level where they're no longer considered to be deferred and behind on projects. Then lastly, we have our internal service funds. So these are the funds that are here and created to support other city funds. We have our workers' comp fund. This fund is so the city is self-funded when it comes to workers' compensation. Any department, any fund that has employees, they make annual contributions to this fund. The contribution amount that each department pays is based off their salary cost and the risk factors associated to the positions within their department. We go through a calculation, so based off the number of employees I have in finance, my risk factor for those positions, which for me is very low because we're clerical, we don't have a lot of risk associated to our jobs. We go through a process that calculates out what our premium is for the workers' comp, and I make a contribution to this fund. And we do this for every city department throughout the entire city. Police, as we know, that there's a much higher risk to their employees, and so they pay a higher premium into this fund. So depending on the risk factor associated to your positions within your department and the salaries that those employees are paid each year determines a premium each department pays into the workers' compensation fund. And then that fund then pays any injury or health claims associated to the employee. The fleet services provides maintenance on all the city fleet vehicles. So if your department owns vehicles, you are paying into the fleet department. If you're a governmental fund, you're paying in to have your vehicles maintained. You're paying an operations rate every year. And then you're also paying a fee to have your vehicles replaced. So we're setting aside funds throughout the life of that vehicle. So when it comes time to replace that vehicle, we have the funds to replace it. The enterprise funds work a little bit different, and they do pay annually into the fleet fund for maintenance of their vehicles. But when it comes time to replace those vehicles, they cash fund that replacement in the year of replacement. Information systems, that's our IT department. It might be a little bit more of a common phrase for people. They provide all of our PCs that the employees use, so any computers that we have our desk, our laptops, whatever we need to perform our job technology-wise. They provide those systems to us, and then similar to the fleet, there's also a replacement fee. So every department pays a replacement fee to them annually. So when our computers are replaced every 5 years, they already have the cash on hand to make those replacements. And then each department also pays an operating rate to the information systems department, and that operating rate is based off the number of employees we have as well as the software we utilize in our department. We'll get you some more information on the rate structure, how it's designed to work. The finance department, we only have 6 employees, but our user rates probably look really high compared to other departments because of the operating system that we use. We're the primary users of the Munis software. It's the city's ERP program. It's expensive, and so we pay a higher rate into it. We have several software systems that we have to utilize to perform our job. And so those are the kind of the things that drive those operating rates in the information systems.
Amy, could you just maybe give us a little bit longer explanation of what you mean by cash funding?
In regards to the internal service funds or the enterprise?
Enterprise.
So we, so when we collect from the water rate users, their monthly water bills, it comes into our operations side. But as we depreciate out our systems, we look at how they're depreciating, what the amount they are depreciating each and every year. And then we fund that depreciation, meaning that we're transferring from the water's operations side to their capital side that amount of money. So as we depreciate out the system, if we're depreciating at $150,000 a month, every month we're transferring from operating capital to capital cash, $150,000. And then that builds up the capital reserves that are needed to do capital improvements on that system. And the improvements that are being done on the system, and every enterprise fund has some type of a system. We're very familiar with the water plant and wastewater plants because they've had some major improvements these last couple of years. But the sanitation department, they have their transfer station that they maintain. Stormwater, they have a stormwater system. We have stormwater pipes in the ground. So each of those 4 enterprise funds have infrastructure they're responsible for improving and maintaining every year. And the amount that they need to make those improvements every year can vary significantly. You might have a major capital project that would exceed an annual funding amount. So you might need 2 or 3 years of funding in order to complete that project. So they might have to keep their capital costs low for several years to build up the capital cash reserves that they need to then make those major improvements. But that's how we handle that funding mechanism. So we're looking at how the system's depreciating to determine what we need to fund the capital side each year.
Then the same would be true with fleet, right? They just, because we buy a lot of pickup trucks sometimes.
Yeah, so fleet and IT work a little bit different in that, so on the internal service funds, when it comes to capital, we have two rate components. So with fleet, if you are a department that has vehicles, so police department, they have their fleet of police cars. And each year, they are charged a capital rate, and the capital rate goes directly into the capital side of the fleet fund. And that money is set aside into savings, so when it comes time to replace those police cars, the money is there, it's on hand to replace them. The police department also pays into fleet an annual maintenance rate. So based off the number of vehicles they have, the type of vehicles those are, how often we replace those vehicles will determine their maintenance and the replacement rates. So if you're charged a maintenance rate, it goes into the operating side, and it is there to support the operations of the fleet fund, which we'll break that down a little bit here in a few minutes. And then you're charged a replacement rate. The replacement rate goes into the capital side, goes into savings, and then it's there for when we need to replace the vehicles. That is the same for all governmental departments, but enterprise funds are a little bit different in that they only pay a maintenance rate into fleet. So they annually pay fleet to maintain their vehicles and equipment, but when it comes time to replace those, they have their capital cash, they have a funding mechanism for those, so they just pay for those vehicles out of their capital cash reserves. They don't pay into fleet annually to build up capital reserves for their vehicle replacements. They just do it from within their own capital funds. Information systems is different in the fact that every department pays a maintenance rate to them and a capital replacement rate. They pay into the information systems. The IT director, the IT department, they really kind of make the decisions on what type of equipment we're using, software we're using. They review every software the city buys, whether they're buying the software or the department's buying it independent of the IT department. They review all those purchases because they want to make certain it's compatible to our network, our system network, that it's secure, that it doesn't compromise our city network at all. So they have a little more oversight on the equipment that departments are using, so they provide those capital replacements for every department. So these are all the funds that pay into the workers' compensation, the internal service funds. So each of these funds pay into fleet, IT, and workers' compensation. Every one of these funds has some type of vehicle or equipment that requires fleet services. They utilize the city's network. They have computers, employees who use those computers. And then any fund that has an employee has to make a payment into the workers' compensation. Okay. Having some touchy issues here. So fleet, those maintenance rates that they're billing out to each department every year, they go to support labor, so salary and benefits, training, equipment, tools, all the parts, oil, everything it takes to maintain our vehicles. And then on their capital replacement rates, those go towards vehicle replacements, and then any structure improvements we need to maintain those vehicles. So improvements that we have done in the past have been like the hoists that will lift the vehicles up in the air so they can get underneath them and work on them. The exhaust extractors that we need in the shop so that we can work on the equipment inside. IT, their operations, they go to support salary and benefits, software. Software is a big cost. Their utilities, any contracted services they have, all their supplies, so the, battery backups that we have in each of our offices, all those little components that you need to have to help your computer function. And then on the capital is the replacements of our workstation, replacement of network equipment. That includes our servers, our data storage, and then they are also supporting the building security and access to the buildings. Workers' compensation, we pay out any medical claims or other claims like physical therapy that's related to an injury on duty. We also pay to have a stop-loss coverage to help us against catastrophic claims. It covers lost time, so if I have an employee who's out that's unable to work due to an injury, they're receiving a payment from the workers' compensation fund for that lost time. And then we also pay a third party to do our benefit administration. So we have a company who provides the administration of our benefits. I will say we have a few challenges this upcoming year with our budget. Workers' compensation is one of them. So we go through that formula to determine what the premium is for each department. And we use the same formula, the same rates that you would use if you were participating in the state insurance fund. If we were to calculate that all out, the city should be, if we were using the state insurance fund to provide our workers' compensation and we went through that formula to calculate out the premium, that total premium payment to them would be around $670,000, $700,000 a year. We're funding ourselves $500,000 a year. So we go through that formula and we calculate out what each department's total is, and then we reduce it from down to that $500,000. And that has worked really well for the city up until the last few years. You guys have probably recall the last 2 years, we've had an amendment each year for our workers' compensation fund because of the cost of our claims. And then you should expect that amendment this year as well. Our claims are just running higher than $500,000 a year. So we need to take a look at, do we increase the annual funding to that every year? Raise that amount up? Do we look at doing a one-time funding to the fund to get us to build up those reserves for the last few years of excess claims that we have had? We're currently in the process of doing an actuary on our workers' compensation fund to help us determine what an appropriate reserve balance is. I mean, because we don't know. We would have thought maybe we had a little extra in there up until these last few years, but now that we are seeing that trend of what medical costs are today, and I'll mention it's not the number of claims. We have probably had fewer claims these last few years, but it's the nature of the claim and the cost of those claims. So it's the type of claim that maybe we have an employee who's out of service for several months. Maybe they are needing physical therapy as part of their recovery, a lot of surgeries. So it's the type of claim, the costs associated to those claims that have really been driving the costs that fund is paying. It's not the number of claims. We're not seeing more accidents today than we were seeing 5 years ago. It's just the nature of the claim. So the trend these last few years is indicating we probably need to visit what that annual funding amount is. So one thing I failed to mention on internal service funds, when we talk about the internal service funds, it's a mix of property tax dollars and it's a mix of user fees. So every department that has employees will pay into these funds. And so that's our general fund employees, that's our water employees, our wastewater employees. All of these funds are supported by a mix of governmental funds and enterprise funds. So you have a combination of property tax dollars, water rate fees, wastewater fees, sanitation fees, stormwater fees are all coming in to support these three funds. So when we look at needing to provide additional funding to them, it's gonna be a mix of all those dollars. So that's all I have today for you. There is additional information within your packet that provides some additional information on the revenue as well as the services of the funds. But right now, I would just like to see what comments that the council may have for us, what they're looking to get out of these work sessions, and any feedback you have to this point in time. We are gonna make certain that we have on each agenda a specific agenda item to allow any comments, questions, concerns council might have about what we presented today, what we presented at the last work session, or what we have planned to present at that future work session. So any comments you might have about today, or just what you want to see throughout this process.
So Director Gordon, I'm going to assume if you have a copy of the agenda with you,
I do.
that we have moved through Roman numeral 4, if I could talk, and we are now entering Roman numeral 5. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
I just want to make sure that we're documenting progress through the agenda. So councilors, we now will move to Roman numeral 5, budget discussion and direction. As Director Gordon said, this is your opportunity to ask questions, have discussions, and provide direction to staff related to the fiscal year 2025 budget. And councilors Spickelmeyer and Klein, if you are listening, you may just have to interrupt us, talk over the top of us so that we can see it, because I don't think we can. Oh, all right, we've got you. We can see you now. So if you have a question, raise your hand or whatever, we'll let you in. So, Councilor Kleberg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as I'm looking at this page titled General Fund, right up on top, the FY '24 budget includes appropriating 100% of the assigned building fund, which is our building reserve, in the amount of $6.4 million. Excluding these funds, the general fund budget is, whatever. I don't know that I'm a big fan of that, since that building reserve fund was actually money that had been put aside to generate the funding for a new fire station. We've already, in my opinion, blown through probably 1.3 million of that. And this money could all be gone and we're still short of fire station. My point. I have no idea where we're gonna make that up.
Councilors Klein and Spickelmeyer, can you hear Councilor Kleberg's comments? Yes? Okay. Well, Council President, I assume you're directing that at your fellow councilors also. We'll certainly have an opportunity to do that. Director Gordon mentioned the 1.6 million of additional dollars that were placed into transportation capital this year, which some might argue that we ignored that for a long time too. But, before we appropriate those dollars, I would expect that we're going to have a pretty healthy discussion on that. When I bring you a budget, I intend to put some more dollars into transportation capital. And if you don't want to support that, you could, amend that, but that would be the direction that I'm going to take. I think one of the things that we are going to probably struggle with this year is, Director Gordon mentioned workman's comp, but, even our fleet rates are going to go up. Everything's getting more expensive. You'll see that when you get to review a purchase price for a new ladder truck that's coming up pretty soon. It wasn't quite what we thought it was going to cost us, and many other things that are happening at the city. So, good discussion, and certainly there are advantages to cash flowing these items such as new facilities and things like that, so. And Council President Kleber, you can certainly, when we get to that point.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Spicklemeyer, I know had stuff he
Oh,
wanted to ask.
Councilor Spickelmeyer,
Thank you. Can you hear me?
we can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I had a question directed at Mr. Mayor. So when the department heads complete their budget requests and they vet it through you, so once the council receives the budget proposal, all of those items have been or supported by you, is that correct?
It's technically, the mayor's budget, so when I bring it to you, it would be my recommendation to council for a budget appropriation. So the directors may ask for things within their budget, and Director Gordon and I go through that, and Claire Blewett, we take a hard look at all the budget requests, and we do make decisions, preliminary decisions on funding requests. But when that budget comes to you, Counselor, you have the authority, the ability to change that as much as you'd like, subject to any limitations we might have on taxing authority. And then it would be your job to convince your fellow counselors to agree with you, at least get 3 others to agree with you on that.
Okay, thank you. I had a follow-up.
Counselor?
Would it be reasonable or possible to have the departments prioritize their special funding requests?
We can do that. I think we kind of do that already, but we can certainly highlight that so that you can see what the requests were coming out of those meetings. Director Gordon has something to add to this.
So part of our process this year is part of your packets that we're gonna build for you this year, you will have a sheet for each and every request that was made. And we'll try to, in that work session where we present the budget request, our thought was to have a pretty bold notation on there, whether it was currently funded or not. So you would know what we currently have in the budget and what we currently don't. At that point in time, it might be too preliminary. We might still be working through the numbers to see what we have available in funding versus what we don't have. But we'll make certain by the time that we wrap the budget up and put it out for publication, that you at least then maybe have a document that shows what's included in that budget and what's not. But that information sheet that you'll have for each and every request, every department had to answer certain questions about their requests. So whether it was a one-time funding request, an ongoing funding that they would need to support that item in future years, the benefits of funding it, the consequences of not funding it. So there'll be information similar to that on that sheet to help give council a full narrative of what that request is and what is intended to provide to the city.
Very good, thank you. That'll be great.
Counselor Klein, you want to jump in there?
I'm just taking it all in right now. I'm sure I'll have some questions at the next session.
I didn't mention earlier, but Counselor Lidkey, I think, is flying between point A and point B, so she's not able to join us today, but she does intend to join us at tonight's council meeting. Counselor Forsman?
Thinking.
You're thinking.
Thinking.
Keep an eye on her.
Might come left field here.
Now, Counselor Spickelmeyer, this will be a fully transparent process, and I think, the more questions we ask, the better we understand the budget, and the better we can explain it to the public, because they're gonna have questions too. And so, my hope is that through this new process that Director Gordon's brought to us, that, maybe it enhances all of our understanding of how the budget works and where the money is coming from and where it's going to. Yeah, especially also having a pretty clear understanding of how our property taxes are gonna work this year. Counselor Forsman?
So is it too early to make an assessment on if we're heading towards not having a property tax increase?
It's too early. Part of our process internally that I didn't share with you is that we reconstruct the payroll budget every year. There is just too much that changes year to year. So, like right now, based off the CPI numbers, we would be looking at the 2.5% COLA. It's too soon to know about medical premiums. But a lot can change those budget numbers just from the makeup of your employees. So if you have a lot of retirements and those positions are replaced by somebody at a, on the lower end of the pay scale, that can change the numbers. So we go through and we recalculate that payroll budget every year. So we just received back from the departments information about their current positions that they have in their budget. And we are going through and running those numbers, and it takes us quite a while to run those numbers. But yeah, it's too soon because we also want to take a look at other revenues that we have available. We'll revisit interest earnings. Dustin will bring forward information on user fees. We'll find out where council stands on rates, so we can determine if we've got those captured in our budget. We don't have our preliminary L2 from the county yet where we can see what tax dollars we have available from new constructions or annexations. We, try to utilize those so that we can keep our current taxpayers without an increase, use those dollars first. But it's too soon. But our goal would then be at that final work session, we would know what we would need from property tax dollars to support the budget as we plan on publishing it.
The only thing I have to say is that I think I like this process very much, so. Thank you for doing this.
As far as regards to what the mayor said is explaining to the public, right? I think the hardest thing to get across and explain enough that is understandable is where they're still seeing a property tax increase, but we're not increasing, right? And so I'm not exactly sure how, I'm sure you've had citizens maybe call, I don't know how well we're getting across to them why that's happening. I guess I don't know a roundabout way of.
Yeah, so one thing to note when we are looking at what this process is gonna, how it's gonna look or how we can present it to council, it's been a collaborative effort with all the department directors. And one of the things we've talked about is should maybe we see if Dan Anderson wants to come in, our county tax assessor, and do a presentation on how property tax dollars, how your assessments are handled every year, how that equates to property tax dollars. But one thing I can say on that is we have, every year, council will pass a tax certification ordinance. And so our taxes are fixed, regardless of what the market's doing. So, if this year our property tax dollars were $23 million, they don't go up because the market went up. Council has to take an action to increase taxes or decrease taxes or keep them the same. There's a formal action for that. And then based off what we certify as our property tax dollar amount, the levy rate adjusts based off what the market's doing. So we're determining a dollar value. However, we don't really know how that's going to impact an individual homeowner because we don't know those outside factors when we're doing that. So I think that's a part that can be hard to wrap our heads around, even myself, is we don't know what other contributing factors could how they can impact levy rates and how they play on a homeowner's tax bill, so.
Yeah, I think another big question people say is, well, if you guys aren't having the money, who has the money, right?
Yeah.
That's the biggest one I
Yeah.
would get, it's like.
And I know, one of the challenges we have had is our residential property values have gone up so much compared to commercial.
Yeah.
So then we as residents, owners of our homes, are paying a larger portion of the tax bill than we were before. So that's kind of been one of those factors we haven't had to consider in the past.
Director Gordon, could you, maybe just to get us all thinking about it, just say a couple of words about some of the revenues that we get from the state of Idaho, and whether or not those revenues are flat, whether they're going to go up or go down this coming year, and how that will impact our budget. So when we talk about general funds and building our general fund dollars, if we're losing some of our shared revenues, how that might impact our programs and quite possibly impact what our tax budget would be this year. And then also maybe include in that, just very briefly, about our shared services programs with the county where, for example, the last couple of years, we've seen a decline and an elimination of the road and bridge tax levy that has cut $400,000 out of our streets program. That is totally out of our hands.
So we have two revenue streams we get from the state of Idaho. One is the revenue we get off liquor taxes. And I think about 5 years ago, the state revamped that program so that they could direct additional money to the court systems for help with litigating. So each year they were shaving back the city's portion of that liquor tax apportionment by 3%, so that in total, they were reducing the city's portion by 15%, and then dedicating those dollars to the court system. Last year was the current year that we're in, the fiscal year 24 budget was the last shift of those dollars. But what it's done is it's kind of brought our liquor revenue down. And the growth that we get off that is really minimal each year, maybe 1%. We'll see those dollars increase each year, and that's about the same for sales tax. So we receive, I think, around $3.8 million a year from the state on sales tax, but it has a very modest, if any, in the growth of it. It's and they did change the formula on how they allocate that out about the same time, about 5 years ago. So I'll get some more information put together for council on those items, and we can include them in a future packet. But we get very little growth from those. Those are pretty much fixed amounts for the city at this point in time. And then from the county, we do receive some revenue through the courts. So any revenues they're collecting on city citations will receive from the county, as well as previous years, the county was levying for road and bridge tax. This current year, the tax year that we're currently in, they opted not to levy for road and bridge tax. The city was receiving approximately $350,000 a year off that levy that we would put into our transportation fund to support the maintenance of our road and bridge systems. So that was a revenue that we lost really quite unexpectedly last year. After we had published our budget is when we found out about that. So we've had to figure out how we keep the transportation fund whole and to replace that revenue. But those are
What was that total revenue drop? Sorry.
it was about $300,000 to $350,000.
Okay.
I believe what we wrote in our budget was $350,000. And
Sales tax revenues?
yeah,
Did you talk about those?
yeah, I did.
Okay.
We do have some, shared services we do with the county. We support 50% of their emergency management coordinator. We have an EMS contract with them where they pay us an amount every year for EMS services. We have similar agreements with the other local governments such as Assault County, Assault County, and then I think the Clearwater Paper Mill. We have some mutual agreements like that where they will help support our EMS services. But I feel like I'm forgetting one, but I don't believe so.
Oh, I will get to take a look at those again, but, you know, I guess just for all of us, just to be aware that, you know, we're connected to the state and we're gonna be impacted by state decisions, you know, and probably the tax commission doesn't even know what some of those are today, but if the economy starts to slow down, we're gonna be impacted by that too. We're gonna lose some revenues, you know, in different ways, transportation revenues too.
What is the best for you guys? So if we started talking like us as counselors, what our goal is, right, with this coming budget? Like, what are we wanting to see funded and what are we hoping to accomplish as counselors? Does that help you guys now to know those things so you kind of know where to try to align those dollars at so that as we get closer, we can kind of see, yes, this is something we could do, no, it's not, or what?
Well, I'll let the mayor weigh in on that as well. I think any information we have from you now is always best. The earlier we have it, the better. If for myself, if I knew, you know, streets, transportation was your priority and we're going through those requests and we know we can only fund some of them and we aren't gonna be able to fund all of them, we would prioritize those requests based off, at least I would prioritize those based off what I felt the consensus of council was gonna be in supporting those requests. But, you know, you will have all those requests before you and you can amend the budget and change the budget to put something else in there that maybe we didn't. But yeah, we would make a lot of decisions based off what we felt ultimately council was gonna support at the end. I mean, that's my goal, is to work with the mayor to put together a budget that you guys will adopt in the end.
I think council can get a sneak peek at what that budget will look like just by pulling up our strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
So all the departments put a lot of time and effort into that, and they identify what they think are some of the higher goals, you know, for the city. And so within that, it tells you where they're spending their time and where we're spending the people's money. So, you know, I'd encourage you to take a look at that, jump on board, help us update that plan as we do that annually, because it's really a policy statement that we're trying to make. And for the council, when you set a budget, ultimately, you know, you're making a policy statement for the people of this city. And so that strategic plan can help you. We're going through a comprehensive plan rewrite, which, you know, somewhat connected, but more long-term, that will identify some areas too of growth, investment, these kind of things. But, you know, pull up that strategic plan, and I think it'll tell you maybe where some of those, I would expect some of the budget requests to be coming out, because it talks about staffing needs, for example. I used Chief Cusick in the back. He just went through an audit of his department recently with McGrath, you know, and McGrath has kind of laid out a roadmap for the future of what, you know, LPD might consider in terms of developing the workforce and growing the workforce at some point as the city grows. And so you can pull some of those things out and find that. And I know the chief is going to reference that in some of his budget requests. And then the council will decide whether or not they can afford it, or if they want to reprioritize. So if you want to take money away from Director Johnson, you can do that and move it over to the police department. That's well within your purview to do that. But take a look at that strategic. Now they're smiling. But take a look, yeah, but I think if you know, there's some things you can do ahead of time before we have these meetings in the future. And I think get a pretty good feel where I think you're gonna see me come from, because I'm gonna use that same document when I sit down with the directors and departments and make sure we're staying on task. That's why we do that.
A lot of the requests that department directors will bring to you, they're based off some external studies. So there's master plans that those capital projects are coming from, the rate study. So a lot of that is supported by those external plans. So those are always good documents to be reviewing and staying familiar with.
Counselor?
I guess I'll just say I don't know on the other council's members and where they're kind of wanting to see, but I guess where I was hoping to see and where my lines is, transportation, right? I wanna see that our roads are starting to get improvements, or getting on top of that. Building funds, that we see that we're taking care of the buildings we have before building new buildings. We have a lot of buildings that have been kind of kicked down the road, but needing repairs. And hopefully somewhere within that, because those are big budget items, is the pool, that we can hopefully work on restoring that pool that all of the citizens use. So that's kind of where I'm hoping to see some of our budget sleeves go. Obviously, you can't always get everything we want out of that, but those are, I think, the two biggest things that seem to have gotten kind of pushed down the road. And I would like to see some more emphasis on those two big items. Spickelmeyer's raising his hand.
Counselor Spickelmeyer?
There, I had to get everything turned on. I was wondering, it seemed like last year the golf course had a presentation for us, kind of showed us their business plan, where they were, the revenues, things like that. Is there something like that that we're going to be looking at in the next couple months?
Yes, is the short answer.
Okay, and is that the same with, I guess the other ones be like the port and the airport?
We'll hear from the airport in part because what you'll have to consider is you put, $600,000 into operations and capital for the airport last year, and it was funded with one-time dollars. So that will come back to you. I can tell you it's already in my budget again for next year, and that will come before the council, and you'll have an opportunity to fund that or not, increase it, decrease it, or eliminate it altogether. So we'll see a lot of those items come before you. We'll invite the airport to come present to us to talk about that, just like we do with some of our service contract providers. We'll hear from them tonight, I guess. And then the golf course, we'll get some kind of an update on that because, as that facility starts to take hold out there, it was council's direction, council's hope that this property is going to begin to generate more revenue and at some point start splitting some of the profits up with the city. So I think we're on track to do that. However, just when you thought the going was good or whatever that saying is, the airport last fall, did what was that called, an audit, Amy, or something like that. They had the FAA folks come out and take a look. President?
It was an appraisal.
Yeah, an appraisal of the airport, and so the recommendation was that piece of property should be bringing in, 3 times what we're paying them right now in money. And they did not ask for that increase last year, but you can bet they're gonna come back and ask for it this year. I fully expect it. So there's just gonna be one more challenge that we're gonna have trying to balance the budget this year. That we have a lot of new challenges this year, and we'll get through it, but we're gonna have to be creative. But we'll see that in their presentation. I'm sure we'll get an update either from Corsco or from the Director of Parks and Rec to talk about that. But and then did you mention the Port of Lewiston also?
Correct.
Yeah, we don't give the port any money right now, but certainly they've got a lot of activity going on over there with the monies that the state of Idaho gave them this year, $10 million, pretty nice money sitting in the bank, making good interest. But they've got a dock project over there. They're gonna tie into our wastewater facility there at some point as they develop that. And I'm not aware of any other project where we would overlap with them currently, other than they have a bunch of money and I'm gonna ask them for some of it, so.
Okay, that answered my question. I must have been looking at the port's, percentage from the property tax breakdowns.
Yeah, the Port of Lewiston, I think, takes a set amount, $50,000 a year in their budget. I think that's what it's been for the last 20-some years, and that's probably what it'll be again this year.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Forsman?
Is there a way to, as Counselor Kleberg was concerned with the building reserve fund, right, and as if we take money out of that, is there a way to, if we do take out of that, that we have an idea how long it would take to replenish what we've taken out as we're going through that?
So currently, there's no funding mechanism for that, because that was taken away in the current year budget. So it was receiving the 1.6 million a year in new funds, and that's shifted to capital transportation. So as you're spending the money, it's just depleting the fund.
Right.
So it's got nothing to.
If we
regenerate those
reallocate it,
funds.
I guess is what I'm getting at.
You could
So-
reallocate property
Right.
taxes to build that fund up again. And I'll just respond, one of the reasons why we chose to fully appropriate the funds that were available to it in the current year budget is we were getting some information late on deferred maintenance. There was a long list of deferred maintenance issues, and I think the mayor and I were both like, well, we don't know, what's council gonna wanna do about this list? So we'll just give them the ability to make those decisions as we progress throughout the year, should you want to. The funds would be appropriated should you want to spend them. But yeah, as we spend them, it's depleting the fund, and there's currently nothing in place to replenish them, but that is something council has the ability to change with the budget.
Yeah, I guess where my brain was at is if we decided we're gonna reallocate, again, those 1.6, say we've addressed some other needs and now we're gonna try to build that fund back up, like I'm thinking in my mind, would that take 2 years, 3 years, to get back where we were, is where I was with the 1.6. It would be 1.6 even, right, is what we can allocate.
You have the ability to take your total property tax dollars and allocate them as you see fit. I mean, we do, of course, use the other property tax dollars to support current services and operations. That 1.6 wasn't specifically dedicated to, one project or, whether, when it was being allocated in the general fund towards that building reserve, and now where it's currently at in capital transportation, I think the thought behind both of those was building up funds so that it could go towards a bigger project. So you could split the difference, you could keep 800,000 in capital transportation, put 800,000 back into the assigned building fund. I mean, that's council's decision on what to do with that fund. With those dollars.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. Can we move on to items, Roman numeral 6? Are you ready?
Yeah.
Everybody ready? Okay, unfinished and new business, city councilor comments. Comments should not be related to an item currently before the council or an item that may come for the council in the foreseeable future. It shall be limited to comments, not discussion. Any council comments today, or you can share them tonight? Councilor Forsman?
Just want to thank you guys for putting the efforts into this. I know that it's obviously extra time that you're having to put into bringing this even more so that we have more time to talk about it, bringing us even more information, as well as even giving us tools to take notes and making sure that we're in the know. So I just appreciate that you brought us all together to find a different way to present the budget, and hopefully that'll also benefit the public with them listening to that they have a clear understanding of what these dollars are being used for and where we get them. And so I just really appreciate the effort put into this, and I'm excited that I have lots more opportunities to ask questions and I don't feel so pushed to the deadline. So that's nice, so I can start marking these down and say, hey, next work session I have some questions. So this is a good formatting so far, and I'm enjoying it.
Councilor Spickelmeyer or Klein?
Nope, I didn't have anything.
Councilor Schroeder?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Mayor comments, I have some comments, but I'm gonna make those tonight. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilor Kleber, second by Councilor Schroeder. Adjourn. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, councilors. We are adjourned.